Okay, so today, I made mention to last time, this is the third part of how stress affects our body, specifically your body. And probably the most important thing for any one of us as beings um, to do is to learn our bodies. So here on Wellness Roundtable, we'll take another step into how stress does affect the human body, assess the effect of that stress. So today we're going to discuss specifically heart rate. So rate and its response to stress and exercise in humans. So what are we talking about when we talk about resting heart rate? I'm sure each one of you has heard so much about the concept of resting heart rate as it pertains to training and recovery and fitness level. So there's been, and there's probably 3 to 5, even maybe more, of working definitions of what the term resting heart rate actually pertains to, or how it's defined. And so for a few different reasons, we're going to define resting heart rate. Bill Kenny did, and Larry Wilmore in their book in 2015. Quoting them, true resting heart rate should only be made under conditions of total relaxation, such as early in the morning before the subject rises from a restful night's sleep. Well, what is the point of doing it right when you wake up prior to you getting a well, there's a couple key things here. Number one, when your body's sleeping at night, you're largely, if you're sleeping well, you're largely temperature regulated. You have very little factors affecting your temperature. You're usually as comfortable as you're going to be during the night's sleep. You haven't eaten any food probably in 4 to 6 hours, depending on how long or how deep in the sleep you are. You've not drank any water or any other fluids at that point. So essentially what Ken are describing is the fact that there's less outside factors or potential factors affecting what that heart rate is going to be. So it is the most reliable source of information regarding the internal status of the human being. When you get awake, obviously you get up out of bed, you balance rate through a gravity-dependent position to stand up, which makes the heart work harder. So now you're increasing, and we'll talk about this a little bit, you're increasing the demand of the heart to beat. So Kenny and Wilmore, as well as other information we have out there in research, tell us that an increase in what we call true resting heart rate, as described by Kenny and Wilmore in 2000, is associated with a few things: increase in inflammation, an increase in distress levels, and a decrease in fitness level. A decrease in true resting heart rate, conversely, is essentially a factor of decreased inflammation, decreased distress levels, and an increase in fitness level. Keep in mind, we're being very, basic with this, very topical. There's multiple different clinical PD, heart disease, and such, which are going to affect your true heart rate and your heart rate at any point. For those of you that have those situations occurring, or you are dealing with one of those clinical issues, physician about how you're exactly assessing. So, interpreting what does it mean? Well, this picture lays mention to how we take this here. We take 2 fingers on the pulse, and then we record through our fingers how many times our heart beat for 30 seconds, and then we multiply that 2 upon waking and before rising. So this is your true resting heart rate, as Bill Kenny and Larry Wilmore, 2015. A couple doing it one of itself tell you what the status of your internal system is and how you're responding to stress. Just like any other measure, we need to have points of measurement before we can start making any assessment of how things are going and how you are by your stress. So let's make sure that we're doing this no less than 1 week, 7 days in a row before we can start making any assessment on a regular basis. I think in the interpretation of the true resting heart rate, and this we don't always see this as it pertains to research is behind a little bit as it pertains to this. Increase in true resting heart rate or higher is something that interpretation-wise is significant. Years ago, a researcher came out with a paper, did a study, and realized that anybody that wakes up and has a, which is increased by 10 beats as per for a week, needs to reduce volume by 15% or so. And now that could be wrong. Some hearing over that information. I believe it was used a week of time, and I believe percent. What he was saying was that an increase in a true heart rate by 10 beats a minute or greater warrants a decrease in training load for that day, possibly linking in true resting heart rate to overtraining. What's the key here? The key is to learn your own wellness and performance patterns, and we do this by learning how you respond to training, how you respond to lifting, and one of those we can tell is by our true resting heart rate. So that's one of the biggest factors I would you and for us as human beings we could use to start learning how we're responding to training and diet. So why do we do pre-rise supine, laying down, true resting heart rate? Well, we know when you wake up, not just get up, when you awaken from sleep, we generally see that cortisol awakening response that I've mentioned a few times. It peaks at about 5 minutes post-awakening. This peaking is associated with sympathetic drive, an increase in arousal, and heart rate. Okay, so as we start getting out of bed and waking, we're starting to become more surroundings. So pre-rise supine heart rate, rising from the bed increases sympathetic nervous system tone to accommodate a gravity-dependent position. I mentioned this a bit ago, from laying down to then standing up. We know there's a significant change in heart rate, sympathetic and parasympathetic drive as you arise and get up and change your position. Keep here with aware. Generally, supine values lying down, we see 50 to 90 beats a minute. So supine heart rate is certainly less than what we would find with our general standing heart rate. Standing heart rate, anywhere between 60 and 100 beats a minute. So athletes, in fact, normative values for supine can go under 30 to 40 beats a minute, upwards of 80, depending on the person. So what can then increase your true resting heart rate? Well, we know from certain research that chronically distressed and burnt out subjects, they see increase in salivary cortisol measures, increase in heart rate. See an increase in salivary cortisol, an increase in heart rate. We don't necessarily see, however, an increase in blood pressure between the two, between chronic subjects and then those who are not chronically distressed. So the blood pressure generally stays the same, but we see heart rate increase in those that are distressed and burnt out. Is your heart's one of the first or number one functions, one of the primal functions of your heart is to maintain stable blood pressure. So think about the differences between a burnt out subject and a subject who is not chronically distressed and burnt out with two equal blood pressures. Why is one beating higher or faster than the other? There's a lot of theories about that. Part of it is also just sleep patterns. However, there's a plethora of information out there and studies that talk about that very thing. With all this, the take home with this is persistent, elevated, true resting heart rate. And what I mean by that is an increase greater than or equal to, that should say greater than or equal to, 10 beats a minute may be indicative of chronic distress and overtraining. So clinically associated with increased fatigue symptoms and a decreased readiness to train. So what am I imploring you to do? Take your true resting heart rate every morning before you get out of bed. Training, whether it be for an Ironman or it be for a marathon or a half marathon or just training, someone like I keep note of that pretty often. I know times when I'm overtraining, times when I'm not. So I'm imploring you to learn more about your response to your training, also to sleep, and like taking your heart rate in the morning. Again, these measures, an increase in 10 beats a minute or higher, are generally associated with an increase in fatigue symptoms and a decrease in readiness to train. Okay, so what can you do? Well, if your true resting heart rate has been persistently elevated, consider other measures of readiness to train and fatigue. Whether it be, and we'll talk about this next time, fatigue or readiness questionnaire, RPE measures. How intense has your training been? Have you been overloading your workouts? Have you not been sleeping, experiencing other significant sources of distress? If so, these can all culminate into what would be an increase in true resting heart rate on a consistent basis. If this is you, where you're noting 5 to 10 days or 2 to 5 days of it's going to be different per person, of elevated true resting heart rate values, consider adapting your planned workout for the day to aid recovery back to normative values. So nutritionally, sleep, psychological, it's never typically just one intervention. It's always going to be a variety of measures that occur. I implore you to think holistically. So if you have an elevated or a persistently elevated true resting heart rate, I'm not saying stop training. Think about what you're doing. Think about your nutrition. Think about your training loads. Think about if you're overloading, and make some adjustments. We call management, and we call that managing the training of an athlete and of a human being. Human beings are very sympathetic and very predisposed to stress and distress, markers of such. So I implore you to take a look at those specifically for training, for or an Ironman, and make adjustments as necessary. Okay, so next time, what are we going to talk about? Well, two very specific things, because next time we have a little bit more of a demonstration type thing. So now we talked about how human beings respond to stress. We talked about how to monitor your sleep. We monitor your true resting heart rate before you get out of bed as a means to monitor your stress. Now, next time we're going to talk about your specific heart rate monitoring during workout, introduce the concept of heart rate variability. I know that's probably been a term most of you have heard to this point. It is pretty complicated stuff, and also not very complicated. So we're going to discuss how to track your heart rate during workouts, and what is meant by heart rate variability, what is good, what is bad, what you should on the 9th of August, be prepared to talk about that. So, idea with today, moving back just a hair, think holistically. That's the most important thing. And be to a variety of things, heart rate being one of them, in a true resting heart rate fashion. I'll go back to the page and see if there's any questions. There doesn't seem to be any questions here, guys. So what I'm going to do is, oh, you have a question? Okay, I have one question here. So I have one question coming through, everybody. So, these questions are always usually very, I look at things a little bit one way. As a clinician, it's always good to get somebody who understands or somebody who's training a different perspective, making me also then delineate this information as best as possible. So the question is, when I'm working out and there is an increase in my heart rate, does that relate to my resting heart? Number one, important to have my heart rate elevated during my workout. I think it's a really good question from a practical point of view. Your true resting heart rate, as Kenny Gilmore mentioned it, and as we mentioned, and as it's kind of being mentioned to bipolar and all the other monitoring places, it's an indicator of actual fitness level in the internal environment of your internal environment. So your response to daily stress, stress at work, nutrition, your sleep, your heart rate during your actual workout. You know, the importance of that is seeing we have an increase in metabolic demand due to the actual workout. So we're seeing an increase in cardiac output and an increase, hopefully, in your body's ability to push blood to all the exercising and working muscles and tissues. Does it relate to the true resting heart rate? It sure does. Those that are fitter or more apt to train and work out regularly have a lower true resting rate. So can have a true resting heart rate between 30 and 50. Everyday people who don't get a lot of exercise, between 50 and 60 or even 70. Now, those are not absolute values, and I wouldn't swear that off as a complete. Actually, I've had athletes with resting heart rate of 80 beats a minute for a couple of different reasons. So are they related? Definitely. Of you that get your heart rate elevated for at least 30 minutes a day, 5 to 7 days a week, you're generally going to see a decrease in your true resting heart rate. Obviously, without mentioning, barring any clinical issues or any clinical diagnoses. So there two are very. To answer the second question, is it more important to have my heart rate elevated during my workout? For human beings, we all know, and well, maybe we don't all know, but one thing we've learned through research is human beings are going to heart eventually. Eventually, as you grow old, and the age for us is going to be very different person to person. But all of our hearts are going to struggle to keep up with, oxygen demand and blood demand throughout our lifetime. So yes, it's an important thing to elevate your heart rate 30 minutes a day, 5 to 7 days, to decrease that resting heart rate and to make your heart more efficient. Another question from David here. Would high-intensity interval training workouts have more of a significant effect on my resting heart rate than, say, a steady long-distance workout? Very big right now with the way CrossFit has been pervasive in this in a very good way, and in some ways bad. It depends on how you look at it. So I'll put it to you this way: if you go every day on the elliptical for 30 minutes, put it on level 12, and then at a such and such a level, 80 RPMs, over time your body adapts. Okay, so the adaptation we talk about is called a SAID principle, with a specific adaptation to impose demands. So as you continue to go in on your elliptical on a day-to-day basis for 30 minutes, the body begins to adapt to the intensity of that actual elliptical workout, and eventually you start burning calories, and your heart has to work less and less hard to provide all the energy and all the oxygen working muscles and tissues. Your body adapts very fast. So high intensity interval training, the great thing about HIIT training has always been and it's also, there's not one version of HIIT training. It's been very there's been different variations of that. Training, the goal of HIIT training is to prevent that adaptation, to keep stressing your heart to provide more blood and oxygen to the working tissues. The end all goal of a HIIT training cardiovascularly anyway is to continue to make your heart adapt to oxygen deficit or to an increase in metabolic demand, with the end all hope being to create a more efficient cardiovascular system. So unfortunately, with one thing with your elliptical workout, you get very much adaptation past the first couple of days, or with the high intensity interval training, if it's done well, will promote more adaptation if it's programmed properly on a day. Hopefully that answered your question. Questions, no problem. Thanks, David, for the questions. Always great to have somebody ask a question that maybe related more to practitioners or to people working out. It's been great. If there's any further questions, otherwise, it's been a great here with you again. Kyle McMinn here with the Wellness Roundtable. And we'll talk about how to track your heart rate during workouts, and we'll discuss heart rate variability. Okay, everybody have a great Friday, great weekend, and we'll catch up with you next week. Thank you.